Salutations, friends, and welcome to the EV Charging Podcast, where we take you behind the scenes of the electric vehicle charging industry in Australia and all around the world. I'm Daniel Carson.
And I'm Jeff Sykes.
And we're your hosts from Solar Choice, your go-to trusted independent advisor for all things clean energy in residential, commercial, and strata buildings.
So today we've got a great episode for you. We spoke with Ed Harvey, who is the founder of Evnex, a New Zealand-based manufacturer of EV chargers. Interestingly, we've just published a review of the Evnex charger on our YouTube channel. So it was great to speak to Ed with some first-hand experience. We really hope you enjoyed this chat we had with Ed.
We are joined today by Ed Harvey, the founder of Evnex, who's come all the way over from New Zealand to join us here in Melbourne. Ed, thanks for coming.
All right, thanks for having me.
So some people in Australia will know Evnex as a brand. I think for people in New Zealand, especially if they drive an EV, Evnex is incredibly well known across the country there. But we might go right back to the very beginning before we talk about Evnex itself and find out where the journey started for you.
Sure. Yeah, so first of all, I grew up on a sheep and beef farm, high country farm in Marlborough in New Zealand, which is the top of the South Island. And I think, look, my parents, I guess, were always sort of reasonably environmentally minded, and that was kind of a great sort of foundation for me to start learning about sustainability and that. And I think also we had some pretty big droughts in Marlborough kind of when I was sort of in my younger years, and I think it really gave me an appreciation for how reliant we are on the natural environment. And that was, I think that was quite an important experience for me. And then I went and studied electronics engineering at Canterbury University in Christchurch. Mm-hmm. And for my final year project, I decided to convert my Honda Accord to electric. For some reason, I'd been interested in electric cars since I was very young, probably since I was about 9 or 10. Wow. I'd wanted to make an electric car. I've got no idea why, but it was something I'd always wanted to do. And then, so my Honda Accord started burning quite a bit of oil, and that was kind of just in my last year of university. And I thought, maybe this is the opportunity. So I pulled the engine out of it, put an electric motor and some batteries in, and away we went. It would have been about 2011, 2012, I think, yeah.
So back then, what were the resources that you were using to do that yourself?
So the technology was obviously not what it is today. So I used a DC series motor, and they were lithium iron phosphate batteries. It was a 20 kilowatt hour pack, and also had some help from the university, the mechanical engineering department, and a few other guys that sort of helped me with some of the mechanical engineering work. Yeah. So I studied electronics engineering, so that was kind of my specialisation. But converting a car to electric is almost more of a mechanical engineering project than electrical, because you're kind of buying a lot of the I didn't design the motor controller myself. That was kind of off the shelf.
And did you drive that around town?
I did, yeah. It was pretty cool back then, because it was not a lot of people would be in an electric car back in those days. So it was probably it would have been a couple of hundred Nissan Leafs, I reckon, around that time. And so for a lot of people, it was the first time that they'd been in an electric car, and it was a cool experience.
What was the range?
About 100k, so it was probably similar and similar to a Generation 1 Nissan Leaf.
Solar Choice was lucky enough to have one of the first EVs in Australia, which was a Mitsubishi i-MiEV.
Oh yeah, I remember them.
Not what you think of when you think of an electric vehicle these days. It's more of a glorified golf car, to be honest. Yeah. But it had a range of about 150 k's. When I picked up use of it in 2018, it had about 95 to 100 k's left on it. So we've sure come a long way.
We sure have, yeah.
With that in mind, back at university, it's probably not a big surprise that you ended up starting an EV charging company.
Yeah, well, look, I was actually thinking about starting a company with, so there was another guy in Christchurch that helped me convert my car to electric. He was right into it, and he was actually sort of importing some of the gear, the motors, the controllers, the batteries from the US and China, and we almost went into business together, sort of starting our EV conversion business. Mm-hmm. And I ended up sort of deciding, he sort of ended up going off on his own a bit with that, and I thought was probably going to be a pretty niche thing.
Much harder to scale.
It is. There'll always be a few people that want to convert a vehicle that's sort of special to them or has some kind of nostalgic value, but probably not too many Honda Accords, I don't think, are going to be converted to electric. So I wanted to get back into the industry one way or the other. I was interested in renewables, electric cars, obviously, and I sort of thought that designing an EV charger would be, something that was sort of accessible, or not a low barrier to entry, but a relatively low barrier. And also, I'd sort of found it challenging to find a well-priced charger for my car as well after I'd built it. So that was sort of where it all came about. Yeah.
And did you have a middle step there between converting your own Honda and then starting Evernex? You were working with Dynamic Controls for a while.
I did, that's right, yeah. So I worked as a hardware engineer at Dynamic Controls for about 3 years after I graduated. And that was great I learned a lot there were some really smart people there, really great engineering team that I worked in, and that was kind of how I learned about a lot of the, designing electronic circuit boards, getting them ready for manufacturing, and made some of the networks there that I kind of, used to grow the business. And since then, quite a number of people from Dynamic Controls have kind of joined Evernex over the last couple of years, which has been cool as well.
So for the listeners, I think it'd be interesting to paint us a picture of what day one looks like. You probably didn't have the big manufacturing facility you've got today. Was it you in your bedroom tinkering away?
It really was, yeah. So look, it didn't start, I'll be honest and say that it didn't start with a really strong commercial foundation. I had an engineering background, and so quite naively I probably thought that it was going to be up and running and profitable a bit sooner than it was. And so it was really, designing. I was looking at kind of open source designs on the internet and sort of building prototypes. And yeah, I was obviously still working for the first year or so, and so
right.
I wasn't really sure if it was something that was going to go anywhere. And I ended up kind of resigning from my job because I felt like I wasn't really giving it my all. And I kind of, when you sort of start getting passionate about something else, I thought, right, well, either I need to kind of really go for this Evernex thing,
sure.
or maybe try something different. So I was in the fortunate position that I could kind of move back to my parents' farm back up in Marlborough, and kind of did a bit of work on the farm while I was sort of doing a bit of work on Evernex as well. So earned a little bit of money there and kind of paid my keep.
Great.
And yeah, so set up a bit of a kind of a lab in my parents' lounge in the spare room, and that was kind of where I first developed the first kind of circuit boards. I wrote all the kind of the first firmware that ran the chargers, and the cloud software as well. So I kind of had basically a full system. The first designs were built using what was called a particle microcontroller. It sort of it was like a system on chip almost that had like the Wi-Fi and the networking, and that was how I designed the first prototype. And then I almost kind of gave up, many times, and almost sort of gave up because I sort of needed to earn some money, and I wasn't kind of quite sure if I was going to be able to sort of scale it up. And so I started applying for some jobs and kind of essentially almost got a job up in Auckland, and then they restructured just a couple of days kind of almost before I sort of signed the contract.
Okay, maybe a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, well, that's right. So, and then I thought, oh, well, look, I'll give this sort of one more shot. So I moved back to Christchurch and actually was lucky enough to kind of get into a business accelerator. So Vodafone ran a really great business accelerator in Christchurch. Unfortunately, it's not there anymore. It was called Vodafone Zone. And I actually had a few friends that were in the accelerator, and they had some spare space there. So I didn't officially get into the program, but they said, hey, you can come along and kind of work from the space, and there'll be other people, doing similar startups and things like that there. So I learned a lot through osmosis, being in that space.
Sure.
And then meeting the kind of organisers of the program, I ended up actually officially getting into the accelerator the year after, and we got some sort of seed funding through that, non-dilutive seed funding. And also some funding from a sustainable grant in Christchurch as well, and that was really what gave me kind of the ability to bring the first person on board.
Right.
And look, it was very, first probably couple of years actually, we were, I didn't take anything out of the business obviously, and then it was about probably $300 a week I think I paid myself and the other couple of guys. So it was tough times for the first few years, but we just sort of, and then we raised our first round of angel investment, which I think was about 300,000 New Zealand dollars. That was sort of our first kind of decent chunk of money.
Mm-hmm. And to give any budding entrepreneurs a bit of a reality check, How long are we talking from your lab in the parents' living room through to first sale of an EV charger?
First sale probably it would have been 3 years, I would say. Yeah. It is. It's incredibly difficult. It's been an incredibly difficult journey, and I think you have to pick something that you're really, really passionate about. When I look back at it over the last couple of years, I do think, I sort of wonder how we've kind of done it and keep going. But I think if you pick something that you really love and there's a purpose behind it, and for me, the sustainability side of things is a big driver for me. That really does help for those days when you sort of think, I'm not sure if I can kind of keep pushing. Yeah.
Yeah. And, we can see when we look at, Jeff and I, we work in this industry, we see all sorts of EV chargers and websites for different companies, and you can tell looking at the EVNEX website, but that passion for sustainability still runs through the blood of the company, with materials that you use, with the branding and marketing. Is that something that you set up from the beginning? It was important to maintain as part of the brand identity?
Absolutely, yeah. Look, we've tried to drive that thinking through into all of the different stages of the business and all of the different functions. So we don't use any plastic packaging. It's all kind of cardboard packaging. The enclosure that we build our chargers in, the plastic comes from what's called a biocircular plastic. So a lot of the kind of actual sort of plastic virgin material comes from kind of like waste timber products, waste oil and things like that. And we think very carefully about a lot of the different decisions we make around how we ship and things like that, because we want to be we need to be leading the sort of the thinking around this and making sure that we're not shipping products out in polystyrene or something like that.
Well, I think that's something that with the emergence of a lot of sort of cheaper brands that are manufactured out of China, there's probably not considerations that are top of mind for some of those companies. It's more how do we get to a really compelling price point, and that's probably some of the first things that you sacrifice.
Yeah, that is. Yeah.
So far in the growth of the company, has that play been worthwhile? You could potentially make a cheaper charger by using less sustainable materials, but that's not what you set out to do.
Yeah, we're never going to be the cheapest in the market, and look, you can't do that being a New Zealand manufactured product anyway.
Yeah.
I think there's a real opportunity to build a leading brand in home charging, and that's really what we're trying to do. That's why we're very focused on home charging. What we're seeing around the world at the moment is actually a bit of consolidation in the AC charging market, or actually DC as well. So it's a bit of a tough time. There's been a lot of investment into charging, and some companies failing recently, unfortunately, some bankruptcies. And I think one of the things we are seeing and going to see more of is more niching down into a real kind of channel specialisations. And so for us, we just think there's a massive opportunity in home charging. 85% plus of charging is going to be done at home. And if we can really get that right, we think there's going to be a massive opportunity there in New Zealand, Australia, potentially further abroad. And look, in terms of the marketing and the brand, it's helping people to understand what smart charging is and the value of it. A lot of people don't really understand how the emissions changes in the grid, or the emissions profile in the grid changes over a 24-hour period. In Australia, obviously, that's really quite pronounced. It can be incredibly clean at one point of the day, and South Australia might be generating a whole bunch of wind, and then at a different time of the day it's largely coal, right? So there is actually a real benefit to having these smarter technologies that can adjust their behaviour, and so that's a big part of it for us is trying to really tell that story and trying to sort of educate in an accessible way for the consumer without too much jargon.
I've recently had a EVNEX charger installed in my garage.
Oh, great.
And full disclosure to the listeners, I was born in Auckland, so I am partial to the EVNEX brand. But it was installed by a friendly electrician who got called away partway through the installation, so I ended up doing the commissioning myself. Oh. But I was actually able to commission it in less than 5 minutes.
Yep.
And partly that came down to just the app was, incredibly easy to use.
Yep. And
the fact that I think one of the point of difference of the EVNEX is it has the inbuilt 4G connection, and my garage unfortunately is a little out of reach of my Wi-Fi, so that I'm not sure how probably would have had to put a repeater in or run a long Ethernet cable. So that just made life simple, and I think normally customers would get a warmer handover with the electrician completing the job, maybe giving them a bit of a demo, but it really didn't feel necessary. Is that something that you've worked on to make that process quite simple as well?
Yeah, it is. I'm glad you had that experience, Jeff. I was a bit worried about what you were going to say there for a minute. No, it is. And look, we're we're certainly not perfect yet. We've got a way to go, and there's a lot of things that we want to improve on. But yes, it's when you decide to niche down and really focus on winning in a channel, you can just put so much more attention right into these small things. And as we start scaling and to be really a winning brand, you do have to pay attention to the small things because that's what people notice. So yeah, all of our chargers have got a built-in cell connection, which is free. We've found that to be a really important or really useful feature, so that we can always provide that top-tier support to our installers. So if somebody's out there installing a product, and look, maybe something they've got a question, or something in the commissioning process hasn't gone quite right, they can just call us, and one of our technical support agents has full kind of visibility of the messages that are coming backwards and forwards from that charger. And installers love that, right? Because it just means they can kind of get out and get on to the next job. And that's not the case with the vast majority of the other products on the market. The sort of local presence or the local support agents just don't have that visibility. And obviously that extends to the customer can kind of have visibility of that data as well through their app. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So something else obviously that's come out in the news is that Evernex has secured a partnership with Polestar.
Yep.
Well done on that. That's a big partnership. Obviously Polestar being a very high quality EV manufacturer. How did this Norwegian company end up partnering with a Kiwi manufacturer?
Yeah, sure. Well, we actually partnered with Polestar firstly in New Zealand,
right,
and more recently in Australia. They're a great brand for us to be partnered with because I think we're really aligned on our sort of I guess our thoughts around our views around sustainability, reducing waste, thinking about different ways to design and manufacture products. And I think, just in terms of our sort of minimalist brand aesthetics, it's a really good match there as well. Polestar decided to work with us because we do provide a really great turnkey solution. So we're not just providing the hardware, but we provide, the apps, obviously there's, software as well, and installation services right across New Zealand and Australia.
And is that an avenue that you'll try to continue going down? I mean, in New Zealand, it's probably a bit easier to form those partnerships with OEMs, whereas in Australia, it's a much more competitive space and you don't have that home turf advantage.
Yeah, it is more difficult. There's more competition. But again, that's where really specialising in home charging is, I think it's seen as a real feather in our cap, because we can come and say that, look, this is where we're putting all of our resource, and we're going to be there as a partner to look after you, and we're not going to be kind of over here doing something in kind of public charging or installing DC rapid chargers or something like that. And so I think that's really helped with some of these partnerships, that they know where our focus is, and we're not trying to be all things to all people.
So earlier this year, there were some news headlines that you secured some VC funding that presumably coincided with your expansion into Australia.
Yes.
How did you go about that move, and how's it played out so far?
Yeah, good. So look, we got some private equity funding through a firm called Adamantium Capital, based up in Sydney. And look, that's been really useful for us to basically get our roots, put our roots down in Australia, invest in building a team over here, and kind of given us the confidence to really take on the Australian market. So that's been going really well. They're a great supportive team, and useful kind of being based up in Sydney as well. And we've got some really good networks as well. They're through being a professional firm. They've made a range of introductions to us, which have been really useful. So, it's not just about the money. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, also the connections.
And so tell us a little bit about the differences that you've observed so far between the Kiwi market and the Aussie market.
Yeah, look, New Zealand was a great market initially for electric vehicles. We had a lot of Japanese imports, which is something that Australia didn't have so much. So a lot of the Nissan Leafs came into New Zealand in the kind of the early, from probably 2011, 2012. And it's so we had some quite high kind of market share. We also had some really good government incentives up until the end of last year. So we had about $7,500 rebate on a new electric vehicle, and I think it was about $3,500 on a second-hand electric vehicle, newly imported. And so that really got our market kind of cranking, and we were up at the sort of the 15% BEV market share, and even up until I think in December it was about kind of 20%.
20% of new sales, that is?
Of sort of that's new and used. All vehicles coming to New Zealand, new and used, it was about 20% BEV.
Okay.
And part of that was this kind of last sugar rush, because people knew that the subsidy was being discontinued in January this year. So we did sort of see this huge peak. But that's the removal of that government support, and also actually the addition of road user charges in New Zealand for electric vehicles. So before January of this year, electric vehicles didn't have to pay road user tax. So it was actually it was a very supportive environment for EVs up until January. But kind of those two things changed. So the subsidy was removed, and the road taxes came back on. And that really slowed the market down. So we dropped down into, I think it would have been about sort of just over sort of 2%, 2 to 3% market share. And it's sort of been building slowly ever since then. But it is, I think last month it was about kind of 5.5% or so BEV market share. So this is pure BEVs, not plug-ins. We mainly talk in kind of pure BEVs. But it's great to see that even in a tough economy, there's a lot of cost of living challenges in New Zealand as well at the moment, obviously. So tough economy, essentially no government support. We're seeing that basically month on month growth now, which is very organic in EV and BEV registration. So we sort of feel like this is it now. It's growing and it's not going to stop. There's no kind of not having any of this sort of government intervention anymore means it's going to be sustainable growth, and it is exciting to see that grow every month. In Australia, it's obviously it's been sort of 7 or 8%, I think, BEV market share over the last couple of months. It's probably stabilised a little bit, or sort of slowed down a little bit, but it's still a really great market for us to be exposed to. Yeah.
And it's important to remember, those of us in the industry, we probably look at things on a micro scale, but people sometimes, the average consumer, they get to zoom in because the news zooms in for them. But in reality, if you zoom out, the trend shows us that the market is growing. It might not be growing at the same speed that it was 3 or 6 months ago or 12 months ago, but more people are buying EVs, and next year even more again are going to be buying.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, what I think is really exciting is that we are very close now. Well, essentially we are there already in some respects to price parity, and I think we're going to get a lot of competition with Chinese manufacturers coming in. Australia is a very attractive low tariff environment for Chinese vehicle manufacturers to sell into. And by all accounts, what we're hearing is there are some very, very good vehicles being made in China now. I think it's going to take a while for consumer perceptions to change a little bit, or to be more accepting of Chinese vehicles. But I think that's absolutely going to happen. We've obviously got BYD, we've got Geely coming into Australia very shortly as well. So and particularly with the US environment at the moment, there's very high tariffs.
Yeah, and the competitive pricing is something that's far exceeded people's expectations. There's just this week that we're recording that the Leap Motor, which is going to be a new brand hitting Australia very, very soon, they just announced a medium-sized SUV at 45k starting point drive away, which is like nothing else on the market, and that's below price parity with ICE vehicles. Yeah. What does the next decade look like for Evernex? Expanding in Australia and growing fast. Where's next?
Yeah, look, geographically, we kind of haven't really made any decisions yet to jump outside of New Zealand and Australia. Australia is a huge market, and it's really only kind of taking off. There's a lot of freestanding homes in Australia as well, which is very well suited for home charging. So we are really going to be focusing a lot of our efforts on Australia for the foreseeable future. That's certainly not to say that we won't go further abroad, but our proposition is really strongest when we can be managing the installation process in market as well, as we're really a turnkey solution. And it's also not, for us, it's just not about selling boxes, it's about that full solution, the smart charging value that we can provide. We are partnering with electricity retailers. We are sort of fast becoming a kind of an aggregator of load as well. So we want to support customers to basically get paid an incentive for agreeing for their charging to be orchestrated. That's kind of the next step. It's one thing for somebody to be able to set a schedule on their charger, on their app or something like that, but as we get more and more renewables, particularly on the Australian grid, a lot more solar and a lot more wind, the variability of generation is going to increase and it's going to become more unpredictable. And I think the value of these technologies that can shift their behaviour in response to how when the clean electricity is going to be generated, the value of those systems is going to increase. And so there's still a lot of work to be done to build the smarts between companies like Evnex that are orchestrating smart charging and, for example, electricity retailers, the electricity distributors, or DNSPs as they call them over here. So that's a big focus for us, is building those software integrations to make that happen and to make it really easy for the consumer to kind of participate in those markets and get rewarded for having their charger orchestrated.
Fair enough. And I guess with the expansion into Australia, you'll be spending a bit more time over here. It doesn't sound like your accent's worn off yet, but how do you plan to sort of stay between the two countries?
Yeah, I'm probably spending about kind of a third to half of my time in Sydney at the moment, which I really enjoy. Sydney's an amazing place and super lucky to be able to spend some time up there, and obviously coming down to Melbourne and that. So yeah, being a market, I think one of the things that I have to keep reminding myself and reminding the team back in New Zealand that even Sydney is the size of the New Zealand economy or larger, right, in the population base. And so when you kind of go back to the New Zealand head office, it's very easy to sort of fall back into the old kind of New Zealand way of thinking and thinking very New Zealand centrically. But the market over here and the money is just a whole nother level. So it's good to be able to come over here and refresh myself with that perspective and look at the ways that the market's different over here as well, and how we need to adapt in terms of the way that we talk and our marketing and our product capabilities. So it's been a cool part of the role, getting to spend some more time over here.
And tell us a little bit about your personal life. You're juggling work and family life.
Yeah, no, we're pretty straightforward. So I'm single, no kids, so that certainly helps because
it makes it easier to spend 30 to 50% of your time away from home.
when you're running a company, it's not to say that you can't do it obviously with a family, but it certainly has made it easier in some ways to be able to travel lots and to really dedicate myself to the business. I obviously don't want to always live my life like that, but it has. It's enabled it to be sort of my real kind of, I guess, passion and focus for the last couple of years. Yeah.
Well, you heard it here. He's an eligible bachelor. No, it's certainly as I spend my time travelling around Australia a little bit for work, it makes it harder and harder, the fact that I've got a 1-year-old child at home to do those trips, and adds a bit more stress onto the family. So it's great that you've got the opportunity to really go all into the expansion geographically.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So look, I think that's all that we've got time for today, Ed. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio here. Hopefully we hear bigger and better things from Evnex, which I'm sure we will as you expand across Australia. And all the best with it until we speak next time.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Daniel. No, I've really enjoyed it. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the EV Charging Podcast, brought to you by Solar Choice, Australia's only independent instant quote comparison service for solar, EV chargers, heat pumps and batteries. We provide independent consultation and tender management for all clean energy projects in the commercial and strata sector, and have over 17 years of experience in the business. Find out more at solarchoice.net.au and stay tuned for the next episode in 2 weeks.
If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review on your favourite podcast app and share the podcast with someone you know. Catch you on the next one.